Gina. Thanks everyone for coming to our panel. Again, working through the pain, how library publishers are learning from workflow documentation. For this panel, we're going to focus on our work over the past year and a half on library publishing workflows project. And we also, as Regina sort of alluded to, we wanted to structure this a little bit differently. We'll have a fairly brief presentation at the start, and then we'll have sort of a roundtable conversation. And for that, we want to welcome people to answer the questions yourselves, pose questions right away. We know that documentation is something that some people have done. A lot of people have tried to start or have know that they need to do. So we really want to try to get a broader view of people's perspectives. We should also just do a quick introduction. My name is Brandon Locke, and I'm the project manager for library publishing workflows at Educopia Institute.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Beamer, and I am the Scholarly Communications and Open Publishing Coordinator at the Claremont Colleges in Southern California.
Hi everyone, I'm Sonya Betz. I'm the head of library publishing and digital production services at the University of Alberta. I'm also a member of the program committee, which is why I've got this great green background going on here.
And I'm Joshua Neds-Fox. I'm the coordinator for digital publishing at the Wayne State University Libraries in Detroit, Michigan.
Great, and I will also drop this, let me see, a document here in the chat. We have an open Google Doc for people. If you'd like to share notes, you're welcome to do that. We also, if you've created documentation about publishing workflows or sort of anything that might be relevant, we welcome you all to drop that there. Let me share my screen. All right. So yeah, again, we're all participants of the Library Publishing Workflows project, and I wanted to share a little bit of background information about that project before we move on. So this is a collaboration between Educopia Institute, the Library Publishing Coalition, and 12 different partner libraries throughout North America. This sort of came about because we realize that the library publishers have services that are really idiosyncratic and homegrown and built to respond to local needs. So through the creation of this kind of documentation and through fostering conversations, as a cohort with other members of the Library Publishing Coalition, we're hoping to sort of help people work through some of the issues that they're dealing with and help to share a lot of the resources that we're developing locally. Although, today's presentation will be focused mostly on the documentation aspect of the work. We're again trying to foster a lot of conversation. We're having a number of open calls with the LPC and focusing on different aspects of workflows throughout the project. This is the documentation project that we've worked on so far. We started off with hour-long interviews with each library partner. From there, we sort of wrote everything out, and we had these semi-structured text descriptions. The partners reviewed and revised the text description. There are actually a couple of rounds of that for most people. Then we created a visual diagram of the workflow based on the feedback. And did another round of revision for that. We recently completed another round of interviews where groups of 3 partners would meet to sort of like review each other's and discuss what was, what might be missing or what questions they had, that sort of thing. And then another round of revisions. That's where we are right now. We're making what will hopefully be the last round of revisions on the visual workflows. And we're looking to release this documentation in the 4th quarter of 2021. So a few of the things that we had that went into this process, where we first immediately realized that every every one of our publishing partners has multiple workflows. So we needed to figure out which ones are more or less represented. How many different workflows did people want to share? We have people sharing between 1 and I would say 5 or 6, depending on how you define workflows. We got multiple people in the room. I think almost every partner had so at least one other person in the room to make sure that all of the work was covered and that multiple perspectives were coming into this. And then our strategy for documenting this is to really sort of like scope in on a single article or an issue and track it through where the library sort of first interacts with that article all the way through to where they hand it off to preservation or wherever they sort of stop actively working with it. So of course, there's a lot to library publishing that exists outside of that, but that's sort of where we've been focusing our work just to make it more manageable for this. And I know these are not very legible on a screen. The workflows tend to be very long and can't really fit on a single screen. But I wanted to give you all an idea of what these diagrams look like and how diverse they are. I also wanted to point out that, a few of these have multiple workflows on them, and you can see the way that the workflows diverge. Things start off the same and then they all go different paths and they come back together. We found that a lot with the partners who shared more than one workflow. So those are the diagrams. We've also created these what we're calling structured text workflows. So these add a lot more context to those diagrams. They have a lot more details, but generally sort of map out the same information. Just these are sort of meant to go together. And then the last bit of documentation that we're developing, we're calling profiles. And these are sort of even a step further back from the workflows. They talk about the publishing programs, how they're staffed, what kind of technology is being used, how many journals are being published. And, we're trying to sort of get a little glimmer of some of the additional work that's not necessarily represented in the workflows themselves. So things like onboarding and training and maintenance and those sorts of things. All right, and then we just wanted each of the 3 partners here today to give a little bit more background on their publishing programs.
Thanks, Brandon. That's an excellent introduction and a good summary for us to remember where we started too. Thank you. As I mentioned, my name is Jennifer Beamer, and I am I'm new to the Claremont Colleges-ish, but I also have just taken over the open publishing program there. So this project has been really helpful in sort of helping me scope. We have 10 active journals. We've had more. Some have stopped being active over the past few years. We're very small actually comparatively. We publish about 150 articles per year. Most of the journals are peer reviewed. They're all generally scholarly publications from faculties or faculty editors affiliated with our campuses. We have 7 campuses. We do have a couple of active student journals, one graduate one and a couple of undergraduate ones that are sometimes active, sometimes not, depending on who takes over or who is planned to, I guess, want to volunteer. We don't have any fees affiliated with working with us in our publishing program, but the journals must be open access. And of course, they must have some kind of campus connection because we're so small. Next slide, Brandon. Our infrastructure has been pretty much the same for hosting journals over the past 10 years. Coming up in November is the anniversary of purchasing Digital Commons. We do some extra little infrastructure services for the journals, including we file for ISSNs on their behalf, and we give DOIs to every article. We also have started a process where we consult a little bit more with them. Originally, some of the consultation just sort of happened with us setting up the journal for them. And then we would sort of let vpress, Digital Commons, sort of do all the training and all the technical support. We've decided to step into the middle of that and start providing consultations on publishing best practices. We still have Digital Commons help us train, because there's just, I'll show you in the staffing in a moment. But we also do some of the troubleshooting. So now, instead of just having our journal editors connect directly with Digital Commons, we want to be the middle value person. The staffing is pretty much me. And I have a 10-hour-a-week publishing assistant who is a wonderful grad student who started working at the library and is super interested in publishing. So that's fantastic, passionate. And then we have a cataloging and metadata team person who does all of our assigning of DOIs and helps with some of the publishing workflow. And I think that's my slides. Thank you.
All right. That was excellent, and I'm grateful for the model, Jennifer. So at Wayne State University, we're the only urban research university in the state, about 26,000 students, and we have been a Digital Commons subscriber since 2005. But our unit was formed in 2011, and as of 2021, we have about 5 active journals, 7 hosted or sunset journals, historical journals that are served and preserved through Digital Commons, and we have multiple hosted ebooks and serials. We have both student and faculty-led publications. Some journals that we provide service for use the editorial software on the back end of Digital Commons, but not the front end, and vice versa. And we also do not charge fees, but we do require that everything that's published through the libraries is open access. Brandon, you can advance that slide. We call ourselves Digital Publishing, but that was conceived very broadly. We are both publishing and the institutional repository and digital collections, and we are in charge of digitization. We currently have 1.5 full-time equivalent digital publishing librarians, and we work in parallel with the director of the Digital Publishing Collaborative, sometimes on projects together, sometimes in support roles for each other. And then seasonally, we will have GSAs, interns, and or practicum students as those are available. Can you advance that slide? Yeah. So we use Digital Commons. We have an Omeka S installation that we also use for creative publishing projects and or digital collections projects. We host our digital collections on an in-house Fedora-based, Fedora/Solr-based backend. We also provide DOI and ISSN assignment work, Crossref members, and we do digitization. And we will do hosting and consultation, both on publishing and digital pedagogy and instruction, and on copyright. And we will do backfile digitization, OCR, and consultations on projects. I think that's it for us as well. So I'll pass along to Sonya.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Sonya Betz, and I'm the head of library publishing and digital production services at the University of Alberta, which is located in Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Canada. So we've been publishing since about 2006, I think. And I describe our publishing program as a big and slightly messy, but really well supported DIY operation. So we have more than 60 actively publishing open access journals, and they collectively produce more than 1,000 articles a year. Most of these are peer-reviewed scholarly publications, and they come from a wide range of disciplines, with the majority of our publishing partners being some kind of scholarly or professional association or community. So really interesting to think about that in the context of our keynote talk this morning. About 20 of our journals are student journals, both undergraduate and graduate. Like my other co-presenters, we don't charge any cost to journals to participate in our program, but we do have an application process, which is really to ensure sort of the journal's readiness to publish before we start supporting them. And we also require that journals adhere to the 3 main criteria that are listed here. So we have some eligibility criteria. Next slide, Brendan. So we provide sort of 2 main areas of support, infrastructure and services. On the infrastructure side, we host and maintain an open journal system site for each journal. And that includes, of course, the server and software upgrades and maintenance, server configuration, and all that technical expertise that goes along with it. We also provide custom domains and coordinate digital preservation activities. And then we mint and register DOIs through Crossref. I'm not sure if templates and documentation counts as like an infrastructure or a service, but we do that too. So that would include things like galley file templates, custom CSS, default author agreements, and privacy policies. As far as services go, I think most of our time is spent troubleshooting and supporting the editorial teams. And this includes everything from helping a journal determine, what the best workflow is for a particular kind of publishing, to troubleshooting a tricky bug in OJS, to helping them understand what stats mean. And I'm sure many of the people attending this call are familiar with those kinds of assistance. We also spend quite a bit of time helping journals understand and establish good solid practices in publishing, and advise on how to get your journal out there, and do training for editorial teams. And then depending on the capacity and resourcing levels, we can also carry out some specialized projects with them. Okay, next slide. The main support team for this work is our library publishing and digital production services team. I mentioned that we are also responsible for digitization at the library. So that's about roughly half of our time. And then the other half of this team's time is spent on publishing, which includes the journal program I described and our OER publishing program as well. The entire team is me, 2 digital initiatives projects librarians, and a digitization and publishing specialist. Our copyright and skull comms librarian also recently joined our team, but her duties really expand across the entire library of the university. So she's not really sort of dedicated to publishing, and supports us mostly in policy and documentation development and advice. We used to have some regular paid graduate student assistants that are experiencing some institutional budget shortfalls right now, so have 0 hours of student staff at the moment. And then we're very lucky to have 2 very highly specialized staff from our library ITS team who handle infrastructure upgrades and maintenance and technical troubleshooting. And I think they spend anywhere from 5 to 25% of their time in any given week on OJS support. So that's life at the University of Alberta. Hopefully that's some context for how our institution approaches its workflow documentation for this project.
Great, thank you. So just another quick reminder, we're gonna sort of launch into more of a free-flowing discussion. If you would like to answer any of the questions that we'll be posing, please raise your hand, and you'll be unmuted. Do know that you will be recorded. So if you would like to answer a question or pose a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I will read it out. And then just one more reminder that we have a document that you can edit. I'll drop it in the chat one more time. All right. All right. So just to kick things off, I was wondering if you could each talk a little bit more about what your experience was like, since these are some sort of in-depth documentation. It's been a very long process with lots of revisions and lots of sort of reflection. So if you could talk about where you ran into challenges, who you had to include, things like that.
Do you want us to go in the same order, Brandon?
Sure.
Probably easy.
Whatever
We can,
order, yeah.
or we can go alphabetical or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So this is a great question. So I didn't my first library experience 7 years ago was running an IR, but not necessarily running journals. So for me, this has been an interesting experience. Typically, if you know how to run an IR or do green OA, it's kind of like a quick and done sort of, I would say, comparatively. I think this experience thus far has done a couple things for me, especially. One, it's made me really think about sustainability and labor issues, possibly because I'm sort of the only one, and how can I get these things done, by myself? It's made me think about capacity a lot as well, and the kinds of services that faculty really need versus the kinds that they really want. I think as well, for me personally, my nickname in my life has been Keener Beamer. And so I'm very keen to do these things really well, and to do them right. And so looking to like University of Alberta, Wayne State, the big publisher, Minnesota, et cetera. This project, being a part of it, has really kind of like helped me scope down and maybe not be so passionate about all the things that we need to do as a smaller liberal arts college, and really focus in on the workflows that need to be done, just, that really are applicable to the type of faculty and type of students and scholarship that we have. That's probably my overarching, and I've said too much, but I'll go be quiet now. Thanks.
My initial reaction to this question, the experience of creating workflow, is that it was painless. That the process was really facilitated by the interviews that we did with the project partners, or the project principals. And so it felt a little like someone reaching into my head and then telling me what I thought. Not in a bad way, but sort of, I did this interview and I walked kind of through what I understood my workflow to be, and then got it presented back to me in this really visual format. And so that was actually kind of cool. And the iterations that happened then, seeing different versions of that visual workflow and, altering little parts of it, correcting parts of it, that felt like a really clarifying process. So that would be if I had one word to describe the process, I would say it was kind of painless. And that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I concur with you, Joshua. I didn't find it especially difficult to do this, but the question that I kept thinking while we were undertaking this work is like, why haven't we done this? Why haven't we actually mapped out our workflows after, I don't know, 14 years of operating a publishing program? Why haven't we actually put down on paper and in a visual format like this some of the steps that we're taking to make this work happen? I think one of the things that we did find a little bit tricky was trying to decide what gets captured and what doesn't get captured, and what's like the right level of detail in a document like this to be useful to us and to be useful to others. So just really trying to think, who is this for? That was one of the things that I kept thinking, who is this for? And why didn't we do this 10 years ago? So.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, since it's work that occurs outside of all of the other work that you have to do all the time. What is the incentive, or the stick or the carrot that makes it actually happen? I had another question. As you were developing your documentation, did you have any kind of aha moments that changed your understanding of the workflow, or maybe your understanding of the program?
I can jump into this one. So I think an aha moment that we had was seeing how often, in trying to make our work sort of seamless and helpful for our journals, we also made our work invisible oftentimes. So I found myself asking, do journals actually understand what kind of labor is involved in the support we're providing? And are there ways to sort of make that labor a bit more visible without creating obstacles for our partners? So it's this, and I think libraries are very good at making the work that they do not necessarily visible to the end clients, because we want it to be easy as possible, no barriers, no obstacles to that work. But if what we do in that exercise is kind of erasing some of that, the visibility of that work, then are we doing ourselves a disservice? So that was one of the moments I kept thinking, like, are are we doing this in some way? Should we make more documents like this to ensure that people understand what those roles and responsibilities are and what work is happening sort of behind the scenes in a publishing program like this?
We noted the kind of the opposite, Sonia. The aha moment for us was how much labor we're doing that that maybe we don't need to be doing. That we might be over laboring for our journals in ways that lots of other libraries aren't. And that helped me to think a little bit about what kinds of services am I providing that are just reactive to realities that were true at the start of my program and aren't now, that I can begin to think about how to change. What do I need to renegotiate with my editors so that I'm not doing labor that's unsustainable? And that was a real aha moment for me, and kind of both in the process and in seeing the resulting workflows at the end. You know, I was looking at the visual workflows. You briefly saw them on a slide, attendees, that Brandon shared, sort of long technical documents with lots of steps and little colored indicators that show who's doing the labor. And mine differed from many of the others in that the color was all on my side and not on anyone else's side. And so it was sort of this solid color of labor going down the document. And so that was a real aha moment for me, and that's changing my understanding of what my program might look like going forward.
We have a question from the audience. Have you considered working with your local TechCom faculty, students, or classes?
Maybe this one's for me, since I'm an only person, or maybe from Sonya, since they don't have. We have, except for this year, due to the pandemic, we don't have any students employed in our library. So we do have, our publishing program is part of our kind of part of our IT or digital initiatives area. And so we do get some support and some feedback and opinions. They're great people to talk with about solving problems and troubleshooting. But I'm really looking forward to hopefully the fall, when we do have some students who are absolutely interested in helping out with some of the workflows at the Claremont colleges. I hope that answers.
Yes, and Doug, I think you know this, but we have a pipeline through through my colleague Cheryl Ball to the TechCom program at Wayne State University, and we are seeing students from that program who are interested in publishing, doing internships with us, and they're getting adjacent, I think, to our publishing program or to aspects of it. The journal workflow that is explicit in this project is not the work that those students are doing, but that I would agree that that's a great resource on campus if you have a program like that those students may be really helpful in this kind of process.
We have another question from the audience here. It says, wondering if Sonya has some examples to share about how they've tried to make their work more visible to journal editors.
So I don't know if we've taken any action on this yet. I feel like it was an aha moment I've had relatively recently. So haven't actioned that one yet, but things that I'm sort of thinking about. And I would love to hear the other presenters' thoughts on this. And then if there are attendees that have thoughts on this, I think there's probably some really good ideas out there. So reworking some of that workflow documentation that we've been creating through this program would be a really good way to do some of that, making those workflows really visible, having nice like color-coded visual representations of where work happens and who's responsible for that work. I think there's lots of different ways to sort of use some of the outputs of this group to highlight some of those things. So that's one thing I've been thinking about.
Joshua or Jen, do you have anything?
I think for us, we haven't got there yet. Normally what we do is, so I call myself a Skullcom coach. And normally what I do is work with my liaison librarians a lot. And so often we have very targeted, targeted exposure to things within their subjects. Sometimes I'll be able to get us some information up on our library webpage to expose what's going on, but often it's kind of a very targeted partnership of the liaison and myself. So I don't know if that makes much sense. I can answer more if it helps.
I think that was good.
Not sure I have anything salient to add to that question.
Okay. Another question from the audience. One of the speakers mentioned sustainability. How do the speakers decide if and when they're done growing their programs? And I think specifically, has the creation of workflows and highlighting of the labor changed your perspective on this?
I think that was me, Karen. Thanks for this question. The sustainability, I think, ties deeply into the labor and the capacity of who can do the work. And I think that's really been highlighted during the time when we've lost budget and also actual people. So what the intent is to do is we're very, I would say, boutique. I don't know if that's the right, I come from a textile science background. So a very boutique sort of setup. So when somebody wanted something, we would say yes and do it and create a journal and fit their needs. So what we're going to be doing moving to in the fall is what Sonya has is sort of like a criteria and eligibility and an application, which will also then come through this kind of model of working with liaisons. So liaisons will identify with the faculty if this is an important journal I think we'll have to see how many applications we get and then decide, can we do 5 or 10 or 3 or 1, or what will be the capacity for the fall as we go. I feel like it's kind of an evolving, iterative, it's just going to be what it's going to be, like all the answers we're getting these days. But yeah, I think you just have to, the workflows have definitely shown me where this invisible visible labor is, and how much of that we can support depends absolutely on human staffing.
Brandon, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Sure. Hey, everybody, I'm Melanie. I'm the PI on this project. You're all doing a great job. I will say that one thing that we have learned in this project is that the only constant is change. I'm sure Brandon could go into more detail, but just the sheer amount of change in personnel and program scope and workflows and technology, even over the 2 years of this project so far, has been frankly staggering. And I don't even know that most of it was related to the pandemic. I think that library publishing programs just evolve and they change over time. And we usually hear about the growth parts of that because that's the stuff that people really like to talk about. But the hey, we're doing too much, or the hey, we're as big as we're going to get, or hey, we're going to put our energy into refiguring rather than endlessly growing is also an important and common area of practice in this. So yes, we have some examples of that, and it's interesting work to watch. And I wish more people would kind of talk publicly about it.
There's also a question, Jennifer, do you have documentation on the plan for working with liaisons?
Yeah, so I'm starting to build all that documentation. I think I'm probably telling you way too much about myself, but I was a synchronized swimming coach. And so this is the kind of the model I built. So I expect the liaisons to have sort of like a basic knowledge of publishing, of OER creation, of sort of SkullColumn topics. And then I become the deep expert that they partner with. And as they become more confident, then they can do the tasks themselves. They can answer the APC questions, and as you can imagine. But I'm always there to help consult or to partner in with them. And so trying to create, I think the hardest part is trying to figure out where the basic is and where the deep is. But there's, of course, lots of good documentation that comes out from Spark and Core and all kinds of, like SkullColumn competencies. I think NISO has released one in the last couple of years. And so I just kind of build those and over time. But I'd be more than happy to share. I love sharing. So watch, I guess, for me somewhere, and I'll be happy to share documentation.
I think this question's for Joshua and Jennifer. Can you talk more about how you decide where the different support tasks and questions go between the library staff and the vPress staff?
I can start tackling that. I think Jennifer has a more directed approach to that. One of the features of using Digital Commons is that it's easy for our constituents to reach out directly to them. And so sometimes that happens whether we like it or not. They'll reach out to the constituent services at vPress, and those folks are happy to engage with our faculty or editors or students or whoever has a question about the journal. That being said, we are unlike Claremont in that we'll do training. We'll do a lot of we'll mediate up and down the line for our constituents. We don't try to necessarily impose it, but we do take a library face first approach to that kind of support. And I think that's a holdover from IR convention, which is, let us deposit it for you. We'll take care of that for you. And that is the kind of service I think both that I think people appreciate that, although there's the alternative model, the very helpful model that Justin Gonder, for instance, has talked about, of mediating services where people can sort of interact with these infrastructures themselves through some kind of service that you create that's automatic, that takes you out of the picture. That's positive as well. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that it relates to Melanie's point a moment ago of how big do you want to get? And that kind of face-to-face service, unless you can keep growing your staff, that means that your program remains small. You sort of have a certain quality of service, but it puts a limit on an upper limit on your size as well. So that's sort of a broad-ranging answer to that question, but that's where we stand with Digital Commons.
I think so. In the similar vein of Josh, I think so. In the past, because we've been so small, it's sort of been really helpful, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why vPress was chosen, because it was sort of full service, and we could just be an intermediary. But I think over time, and as Melanie exactly hit the nail on the head, is that with changes in staff or not having staff, it was it's just easier it was easier at the time to let vPress take over these things, because there are often things like, I can't publish this article, so help me now. And if there's not a person to do that at the library, then it's easier. But I think as we realize things are growing and things are being published and nobody's watching those things, we realized that vPress is actually doing a lot of the work, and we had no idea what our editors were doing, because we don't get involved too much in the editorial process. That's up to the faculty. We can provide guidelines or help them get going, but we don't step in and edit or do anything of that kind of workflow. So Now we, I think, have just put ourselves as the direct contact. And then if we need to reach out to vpress, we do that if it's a technical issue that we're not capable of fixing. So that, again, that we can just be in it, I think is the biggest thing. I want to know what's going on. We want to know who's publishing or charging or doing some random thing that we didn't know they were going to do. So I don't know if that's a really great technical workflow, but it's just kind of a gut. We need to be there for them.
Do any of you use other like third-party services like with OJS? Do you point people to PKP documentation?
Yes, all the time. So that documentation is being actively maintained too. There's a documentation interest group with PKP that does an excellent job of keeping that up to date. So we maintain sort of our internal documentation that's like specific to our local context. And then whenever possible, we try to point people to places where there's, shared actively maintained documentation so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's really an excellent strategy for helping to manage that. And then we contribute to that documentation too to help keep it up to date.
There's another comment in the chat. I want to again remind everyone that you can also answer these questions if you like by raising your hand or putting it in the chat. But someone in the audience said, when I was the managing editor of a journal, I created a workflow diagram for the incoming academic editors for them to better understand who touched a manuscript when, why the schedule was set as it was, when costs per charge escalated, etc. They said none of this was transparent even to veteran editors, and it was useful for them to get a sense of the labor and technical constraints we had to work with. And I think on that note, I was wondering how you all plan to use this documentation in your own programs.
So I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, after we finished our last meetup. I think there's a couple of different audiences, and we did talk about this all together, that this can be used for. I think there's sort of these different workflow visualizations that could be used. One, of course, to show faculty what's involved and all of the process. And then two, I think the biggest use for this workflow for us is going to be to admin and showing all the different types of labor. Especially I'm digging on Sonya's invisible, visible labor to show that we need to advocate for more people or to increase our capacity or maybe not to increase capacity either, just to sustain ourselves over time. Super useful.
I think that the starting workflow is a great jumping off point for iterating to different, more practicable or more sustainable workflows. I think that the broad documentation of the library workflows project, that is all of the workflows that are coming out of this from a variety of different institutions of different sizes, with different size publishing programs, especially with different infrastructures, are going to be really helpful for my program as we do like strategizing for change. So, I want to be agnostic about the service, but obviously I'm in a digital commons supported institution. Let's say digital commons, let's say vpress fell into the sea tomorrow and I needed to switch to another infrastructure. The existing workflows that are using those infrastructures are going to be really instructive to me about the kinds of programs that I can build with that kind of support. And so I wish no harm on vpress, by the way. So I think that has impact for us. That's one of the ways I plan to use the broad documentation as a way of sort of evaluating the field to see, okay, these are directions we might go in as things change. And if there's, as Melanie said, one of the features of library publishing is that it changes quickly. Another point is that this current, sort of moment in the zeitgeist is, there's been massive change over the last year, and I anticipate that lots of things will look different in the future, and these workflows are coming they couldn't have come at a better time to sort of have documentation to evaluate where to move.
Yeah, and like my other presenters, I think that sharing these kinds of documents with other stakeholders, so I'm thinking specifically of our own staff and admin, but then also other publishing partners, both new and sort of established partners, is definitely one of the things I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking about using these workflows as a model to create some sort of corresponding or partner workflows for things that we didn't really touch on in this workflow process. So we didn't talk much about journal intakes. We talked a lot about publishing and production workflows, but I would love to have like a similar workflow for our intake. That's often like our busiest, most active sort of stage of journal support. So having a workflow that represents that work would be really, really nice. And then similarly, we don't really have any documented sort of workflows for how to retire journals or transfer them to other homes. And that's something, I think those requests often come and they're like, we approach them a little bit on a case-by-case basis, but it's kind of creating standard and consistent processes across all of the different areas of our service portfolio. I think these kinds of visual documents are just so helpful to do that and to see at a glance how things work. So that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Has this process spurred any other documentation in your programs? Like Sonya, you were talking about the onboarding. Is it wishful thinking for me that this is just kicking off a chain of documentation in your libraries?
We've got really excellent documentation thanks to our publishing and digitization specialist, who is a documentation wizard. So we've got really, really good documentation for some of these things, but we don't have this kind of documentation. We don't have sort of a visual map or workflow kind of document like this that provides it at a glance. So I think it's definitely generated some thoughts about what other kinds of documentation would be really helpful, or where there are some gaps now, where there are areas where we are kind of missing out on some of that sort of stuff.
So the written Skullcom coach stuff definitely has to have the visuals. And now we've started documenting our IR in the same way too. So it has Brandon, even though I didn't want to do it because I'm not good at making the boxes and the stuff, but someone's doing it for me, so it's all good. But yes, it's made us think about looking at all the workflows in publishing for us.
Yeah, and I don't know that that the visual workflow format is necessarily where I'm jumping off from, but there is definitely sort of a slow documentation fever growing in our unit. And we are documenting a number of other processes, and it may be that it's kicked off by this project.
Sorry, I was busy typing documentation fever into the chat. There's another question here. You all mentioned that you register DOIs. Are there other measures to boost dissemination and discovery, like application and deposit indexes or integration of metadata with catalog and search systems? They also were wondering if anyone is requesting additional dissemination or discovery efforts. And I think just to throw another question on top of that, is that something you see as being part of the documentation process, to sort of develop a list and say, like, this is what everyone is doing for dissemination, who, does this fit for this journal, that sort of thing?
So I don't think, Timothy, we kind of just do the DOIs. We'd like to offer an extension of services, which is helping more people get indexed in places that they would like to, but usually they suggest that to us. We would like them to be indexed in Doge as kind of like a great place to be, and something that kind of raises the quality, I think kind of raises the quality of our program that we're helping extend themselves. But we don't really have plans right now to do that until we get the rest of the shop in order, I would say, and looking sparkly. So.
Sparkly, I like that. This is one of those questions I dread because it's a point of anxiety. It's one of those things that I realize, dread's the wrong word. I realize that it is very important for again, it feels like the word of the day has been growth or sustainable growth, but it's very important for scaling that this is a service that is important to the people who are publishing journals. They need this. And it's not an area that I know enough about. And so I have this sort of, forgive me, reticence, to get started. But I can imagine a future LPC level project like library publishing workflows that's about kickstarting the field's general understanding of the dissemination process. And I am looking forward to the presentations this week on this very topic. And so that's a little bit confession, a little bit answer to the question.
This is a thing that I'm super, super stoked about. And I think is an area that libraries have a lot of expertise in. So Joshua, I'm sure you know tons about this that maybe you're not expressing, but I'm like 100% you know this stuff. We know this stuff as librarians. Like we understand how the discovery and dissemination tools work within a library infrastructure and all of those little networked pieces that fit together, like open URLs and discovery systems and indexing and abstracting services. We know how they all kind of fit together to make this this web of discovery for all of these different journals. The journals, when they ask about this, though, they're not asking about dissemination discovery. They always just ask about impact. So it's like, I think it's a problem that we actually can, I would love to see LPC focus on some of this. I'm super jazzed about this idea, but we do some like basic things. So we do title level cataloging for our journals and share those records in WorldCat. We get them into our SFX knowledge base where they can be accessed by other journals. I think they go on like an EBSCO free journals list. We try to get them into the DOAJ. But we all know how like many little pieces need to be in place for the journal to be included in some of both the commercial indexing abstracting services and then something like directory of open access journals. So it's a lot of work. I think I spend a lot of time when I'm talking to editors about this kind of work, sort of trying to manage expectations around how fast it'll be before they're sort of visible in some of those big tools that they're used to using, especially if they're a new publication without any kind of publication history, and how important it is for them to build their reputation and their publishing history first before tackling some of those things. But even something as simple as registering them for an ISSN and then getting the DOIs out there are really good steps towards making them more discoverable and disseminated into other places. So yeah, that one's one I think we've got lots of avenues to explore. So.
That was really helpful, Sonya. As you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, I do that. Oh, I did that.
I wanted to highlight one other thing that came in from the audience. Someone said, I actually use our best organized journal as a kind of example checklist for journals. So they can look at that and make sure they've addressed all the same things, which is, I think, a really interesting ad hoc documentation strategy, right? Using what you have as a checklist. I also wanted to add that in the first quarter of next year, we will be releasing materials that help people create their own documentation. So if like Jennifer said, if you're not good with the boxes, we will be releasing some templates and some guides on how people can do that. And we'll be hosting some webinars and things like that. So again, we'll be releasing the documentation at the end of this year, and then making that push to encourage people to make their own at the start of next year. I see that we have just a couple of minutes left. I was wondering if any of the panelists have any last thoughts to share with people that will maybe get them energized to start their documentation maybe next Monday after the forum.
Yes. I would say that one of the impacts of this entire project that I really am looking forward to is seeing the future new library publishing programs not have to start from scratch or create these ersatz processes, that these workflows are going to be available. I mean, they would have been invaluable to me, 10 years ago when we started. And I'm looking forward to a future where these best practices sort of begin to align because this material is out there, that the sort of rough edge cases get planed off of library and future library publishers benefit from our, let's call them experiments, not mistakes, that we made and then documented here with these workflows.
I think all I can say is plus 100, Josh. I feel like this has been just really a dream for me because getting to learn from everybody else, kind of starting to think about what our program looks like. It's fantastic. I can't be more excited, and I should look excited. So yeah.
Yeah, it really is such a pleasure to talk to other people about this work. I think this is like one of the things I miss so much about having an in-person library publishing forum, and some of the other events that we didn't attend this year, is that opportunity to like find someone. It's like, oh, you've got an institution that sounds like it's doing sort of similar work to ours. Can we just talk a bit about how your program works? What's some of the nitty gritty about how you do that specific thing that we've sort of been struggling with? So having this group over the past year especially has been really like helpful and supportive. But also just recognizing the sheer variety of different kinds of library publishing activities that are out there, and how very different everyone's workflows are, really, I think, speaks to sort of the creativity and innovation that's in this space right now, which is really exciting. So I'm not sure, maybe to inspire everyone, like don't be shy about reaching out. If you find one of those partners has documentation that looks an awful lot like yours, then I'm sure we're all happy to share and chat more, and set up some calls to talk about this work.
Also, I should have added too, we couldn't do this without Brandon, and Melanie, and they're amazing. You need to find people like them to help coordinate all this, because they're unbelievably knowledgeable and helpful.
And we were very lucky to have funding from IMLS that let us do this in a really dedicated way. So yeah, it's been a dream project all around. And I will say, I know we're at the end of time, but I just want to say really quickly, in addition to putting out here's how to make your own workflow documentation tools, we're also planning on putting out some kind of additional tools to say okay, if you want to create workflow documentation for the purpose of, for a variety of purposes, including things like examining your labor practices, here's how you might approach that. So if you have particular ideas or needs on how this kind of workflow documentation could be useful to you that you want to suggest to us as possible use cases, please do reach out to Brandon.
Yes, that would be great. I dropped my email in the chat a second ago.
Cool.
So yeah, we are at time. Thank you for all the panelists, and I will hand it off to Regina for some closing announcements.
Well, thank you, Jennifer.